All right, here is the probably not going to be so quick lecture on Lyndon Baines Johnson, who takes over the presidency after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. These are everything related to Johnson that is not a part of the Vietnam War, which is the bulk of his administration. Johnson's administration and Nixon's first term in office are surrounded by and defined by the Vietnam War. This is looking solely at domestic policies, and his Vietnam agenda will be addressed in the Vietnam War segments. So Lyndon Johnson becomes president in 1963 following the assassination of John F. Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. Johnson is sworn into office on Air Force One. Again, as mentioned in lecture, he doesn't need to be sworn in. The rule just states that as soon as the president dies, the vice president is automatically in office. So interestingly enough, Johnson is able to get past several pieces of legislation that Kennedy wanted, but Kennedy could not get past because of his because of the Republicans in Congress, and also because of the Southern Democrats who wouldn't do anything JFK wanted. And the first one is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This simply reaffirms the 14th Amendment and says that discrimination is not allowed in any form. It's not allowed on the basis of race, gender, creed, etc. It is another step in the government ending Jim Crow laws. So the first set of Jim Crow laws is ended with regards to Brown versus Board of Education. You'll get the Civil Rights Act of 64 that says that there can be no form of discrimination, not in government, not in private businesses, that any form of that does violate the 14th Amendment, that all Americans are created equal and they are to be treated as such. It is the grounds for more lawsuits with regards to civil rights violations and Jim Crow laws that exist in the South. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is founded to try to end discrimination with regards to employment. If you ever fill out a job application, you will see somewhere, usually at the bottom, a little sign that says they're an equal opportunity employer. I am not aware of any business that is allowed to be in existence that is not an equal opportunity employer, and sometimes even job like ads and stuff, they'll point out that they're an equal opportunity employer, which simply means that they do not discriminate with regards to their hiring practices. In fact, if someone does discriminate you with regards to their hiring practices, you can sue them. Of course, there are ways around this. There are ways around everything. You could say that the reason you didn't hire somebody was because they didn't meet your qualifications. And there are still issues that will be addressed with regards to African Americans having to take intelligence tests or other special types of tests that aren't offered to white people, or that if they're offered, they're graded differently, and that will come up later on within the Nixon administration of addressing getting rid of that. Johnson's major focus, his personal focus, his goal was what is called the Great Society. That is his domestic agenda, the Great Society. With the Great Society, the goal or the purpose is a war on poverty. He wants to end poverty within the United States. And even though his administration is overshadowed by the events in Vietnam that occur while he is president, he wanted the Great Society and moves toward ending poverty within the United States. You need to write this down, underline, highlight it, loop-de-loop. The Great Society is an extension of the New Deal. It's inspired by the New Deal. It's the 1960s version of the New Deal. It can be a continuation of the New Deal. It's related to the New Deal. He is inspired by the New Deal as seen and that took place under FDR. The difference is we were not in a catastrophic economic disaster when Johnson starts the Great Society. He takes home or pushes the take-home message from the New Deal, and that the government is responsible for financial success of its citizens. He believes the government should do more in order to help people who, for whatever reason, cannot economically get by within the United States. So many of the programs that are in existence today, you probably know them as what's called entitlement programs. They are started within the Great Society, but their inspiration is within the New Deal under FDR. So just very quickly, the election of 64. So Johnson becomes president in 63. He runs on his own in 64. He goes against a guy named Barry Goldwater. The real issue is the issue of Vietnam, and LBJ wins, because at that time, the Vietnam War was popular. It had just started. We didn't realize what a disaster it was going to be. And so it was, people saw him as tough on communism, and that was good. And some of it, you could argue, was a success of the Great Society programs. People liked the direction the country was going in. Some of it, you could argue, was holding to the memory of Kennedy, what Kennedy would have wanted. So that may have happened as well. So the Great Society has four main parts: education, medical care, immigration reform, and voting rights. Within his term of office from 64 to 68, he creates the Department of Transportation, as well as the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Housing and Urban Development is clearly geared toward urban housing, housing for those that cannot afford it, housing for people that need extra assistance. You may be familiar with something called Section 8 housing. That is, I'm going to say a voucher, but not really. It's ability to rent apartments and houses, and you pay on a sliding scale what you are able to pay, and the government will pay the rest of it. So education, here we go. So when Johnson and Johnson's advisors look at what is it that causes poverty, they feel like poverty is really caused by four main things, but kind of really two things, and one is education. And the idea that, in theory, the more education you achieve, the higher amount of money that you are able to make. But it is believed that the way to the American dream, the rags to riches story, is achieved through the path of education. That getting an education and achieving a high level of education, or at least a distinguishable skill set, is how to get yourself out of poverty. It was believed and quite easily proven that because of the inequality within education that had existed within the United States, that education wasn't being equally applied to everyone, and that not everyone starts off their educational path on equal footing. And the goal was to sort of erase whatever factors that might cause a person to not start on equal educational footing. For example, the numbers I'm going to quote are totally made up because I can't remember the actual numbers from the study, but you'll get the gist. So there was a study that was done on children entering kindergarten. And the study found that children who entered kindergarten whose parents had a high school education or less had been exposed to approximately 500 different words. And kids who entered kindergarten whose parents or one of the parents had achieved a bachelor's degree, so 4 years of college, had been exposed to something close to maybe 1,000 different words. And the kid who started kindergarten whose parents had achieved a postgraduate degree, master's, doctorate, etc., PhD, had been exposed to something like 1,400 or 1,500 different words. And the idea or the theory was this, that kids aren't starting their educational career off equally. And we wanted that to be the case. We wanted to what define your success in education to be you. not what you live in, not what you were brought up in, but your desire with which to succeed. So Head Start was created. Head Start still exists now. And it's sometimes called, in North Carolina, it's known as Mort 4. It is free preschool education for children that met certain qualifications. Those qualifications were either financial number, or they had a developmental disability or developmental delay. They today can be mixed with their developmentally non-financial needed peers, but that is the original purpose of that group. It has morphed into different things, but at the core, the goal of Head Start and any of the free preschool programs are to get children so that everyone starts kindergarten on an equal basis, so that when you go from there, what you achieve in education is up to you, that the government has provided you with that equal start. Medical care. So, boy, is healthcare an ongoing issue within the United States, huh? Medicare was really created and came up out of the idea of Social Security within the New Deal. The concept of it was, so please don't get me wrong, the concept of it was. Again, we saw disparity within the United States, that it's important for the United States to have a healthy population. Why? Because a healthy population can go to work, and a healthy working population can be taxed. And the more you can be taxed, the more money the government makes. It's a win-win for everyone involved. And it became clear that, now please keep in mind, at the time this was developed, health insurance as we know it, and health insurance even before the Affordable Care Act, was very, 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 very different. That all, insurance companies and that all kind of stuff really comes up under Nixon. Anyway, so the idea was that our elderly population needed to have access to health care, and that often as you get older, your health needs increase, and you can probably see this with your own parents or your grandparents or your great-grandparents, and that we wanted older people to be able to afford the medical care that they needed. And so as a result, Medicare was created for elderly adults. I believe now it starts at 64, 65, and about the same time that you get to your Social Security. Medicare does not cover all of your health expenses. It covers the bulk of them. And I'm sure you have seen the AARP commercials telling people to don't forget their Part B Medicare and that sort of thing. But it certainly makes it better. Medicare is paid through taxpayer revenue. That is how Medicare is paid for. Medicaid is for people below a certain income line, that we wanted people to be able to receive the medical attention that they needed. And this a lot of times is geared toward children. We get the development of women, infant, and children. It's WIC. If you've ever been in the grocery store and you've looked at the cereal aisle or the milk aisle or any aisle, and you see those little tags that say WIC approved, that means that a parent could use a WIC voucher with which to purchase that item for their child. But Medicaid is the idea that people of a lower income that are not able to afford health care, basic health care, can get Medicaid. It is not free health care, it is reduced benefits, where if somebody goes to the doctor and they do not have Medicare, they may pay their insurance copay of $25, $30. Or if somebody that goes in that does not have health insurance and does not qualify for Medicaid, they may pay the full price of the office visit, which is maybe like $110. The Medicaid patient would pay like $3 or $5, and the same would be said for prescriptions. Medicaid is similar to Medicare in that it is paid for through taxpayer revenue. Immigration reform, because I like to talk about immigration in the United States as well. Immigration reform and the Nationality Act address quota systems that have previously been set up following World War I and World War II, and attempted to make it easier for citizens to make it easier for immigrants to become citizens of the United States. Voting rights. So the Voting Rights Act of 65 was sort of one of the legacies of the civil rights movement. It is one of the legacies of the Kennedy administration and something he had been working on. And it says that you cannot discriminate against people when it comes to voting. So the idea that you cannot do literacy tests, you can't do grandfather clauses. This was further extended with the 24th Amendment, which says that, and the 24th Amendment was ratified in 64. The 24th Amendment says that you cannot have poll taxes. So the 24th Amendment covers poll taxes. The Voting Rights Act of 65 covers everything else. The main thing that you want to get out of the Great Society is that it's connected.
May I have your attention? If anybody has a deposit to be made, please bring it to the office at this time. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, you just heard a random announcement being made. You want to get the Great Society's connection to the New Deal, that it is the government taking responsibility or believing it is responsible for the financial lives of its citizens. It creates/extends welfare, or what you would call welfare. It is funded through deficit spending. It is extremely costly. A number of all the programs within the Great Society itself, many of these programs are still alive in the current day. And that during the Johnson administration, his administration is trying to fund both the very, very, very expensive Vietnam War and the equally expensive Great Society programs. And one of them is going to have to give in some respects. And the Vietnam War ends up winning out. And Johnson, later on, after he was no longer president, said that he really hated the Vietnam War because he wanted to end poverty. That was his focus. And he had to sacrifice a number of the Great Society programs because taxpayer revenue and deficit spending just couldn't cover both. We were getting massively even more in debt. The Warren Court, such as the Warren Commission, comes up during this time period of Kennedy and Johnson, and it is known for a series of very liberal court rulings. You would have covered all of these in civics. They banned prayer in public schools. That is school delivered prayer. You can pray all you want every day, all day long in school. No one's going to stop you. The school cannot get up and say, we are now going to give a religion-specific prayer. That is because of the First Amendment, freedom of religion. The state and any workers of the state cannot endorse any one religion. You can't make people give state-required loyalty oaths. That was a carryover from the previous Red Scare. It has to deal with whether or not you can censor books and what books can be censored. It's free speech when protesting the war. That's the one where the kids wore the black armbands and they said they couldn't do it because of dress code policy. And the kids said, well, it's my right to free speech, and they end up winning. It's very important apportionment of congressional districts and representational districts where gerrymandering occurred. And the Warren Court is the court that famously had the case of Miranda versus Arizona and Escobedo versus Illinois, which expanded the rights of the accused. And that's where, if you're familiar with the Miranda rights, hopefully you're not too familiar, that's where that comes from. And you can see here major landmark cases. And that ends the wonderful look at the Johnson administration as far as domestic policy. So the Johnson administration is Great Society, it's extension of civil rights, voting rights. It is the Vietnam War, which will be looked at separately. And